Hey guys, I'm Scott with Before You Buy, where we do product reviews for you to make sure it's what you want before you buy it. And I'm super excited today. We have the one and only Rob Houlihan. Rob, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. He is the CTO for our local utilities. Now, if you've seen my last video about the Starlink, and I kind of did a humble brag, kind of not so humble maybe, about our 10 gig internet. Rob has been the mastermind behind all of that. And I know he's not going to brag about himself, so I'm going to a little bit, where he's taken our network from, cable modem, and we were kind of ahead of the technology, and then it kind of started falling behind. And then Rob just jumps in and just exploded our network. And now correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, we're rated one of the fastest in the country, maybe the world.
Yeah, we were rated by PC Mag fastest ISP in the nation last year, and later in the year, then we were also rated #1 gaming ISP in the nation. So yeah, we have a full 10 gig synchronous network. I think it's $117 a month, no install fee, no contracts. Just we're here to serve the community and provide amazing service, and that's what we do.
Yeah, and you do provide amazing service. And my last video, there was one person that commented and said, wow, you pay $100 for that? That's incredibly expensive. And I was like, hey, just so you know, that's 10,000 megabits a second. And he said, yes, I'm in Sweden, and it's $45 a month for me.
Nice.
I was like, well, okay.
As long as we're on this, right?
Yeah, if we're on the same page for 10 gig, you get it for 45. That's insane. But in the United States, 117 to your house, insane. So Rob's here to help explain the different technologies, right? So Starlink is low orbit satellite. We're going to compare that to high orbit satellite, which is kind of the more traditional style, like Hughes Net, DSL, 5G, cable, and then fiber. Can it even compete? So Rob, take it away, kind of hit whatever you see fit, kind of in order, or, just explain it all to us.
Yeah, so I saw your previous video, and it's really interesting. The technology has really advanced, and Elon has a vision that is pretty exciting. Compared to traditional satellite that were geosynchronous orbit, those satellites are much higher, much farther away from Earth, so the signal has to travel that much farther and back, and so your latency is really, really high. You're going to see several hundred megabits, several hundred milliseconds,
yeah,
latency. So that makes interactive gaming not work very well. If you're just streaming Netflix, that might be okay, but then they have data caps on top of that, so I think there's some challenges there. This new service is definitely a step in the right direction, especially if you're very rural and you don't have any other options. If you can get 40, 50, 80 megabits, that's pretty awesome, especially with the latency that you were seeing of, around 40 milliseconds.
Yep.
That's pretty good. When you compare that to fiber, however, there's not much comparison. I think in your testing, you're seeing 1 millisecond latency, so several hundred milliseconds, 40 milliseconds, and our network is 1 millisecond.
And I did have one person absolutely mad at me because they said, why is he getting this? He has 1 millisecond. Why does he get this technology? And I said, well, it's actually my brother-in-law's, by the way. He's just letting me test it. It's his backup internet, but carry on. Milliseconds matter, though.
They do matter, and especially in video calls like this, or in gaming situations, which is why we got the award. I was more proud of the gaming award than the speed award because that's a truer test of the network. And we use speed, 250 megabit is our base package. And we call that speed, but that's not actually the speed, that's just the throughput. The speed is the latency, how fast you can get to Chicago and back. That's the latency. And when you have lower latency, that means if you're playing Call of Duty and you pull a trigger, come around a corner, pull a trigger, you're actually going to win that gunfight more often on our network than you are going to on somebody else's network, because the response time is just so amazingly fast.
Yeah, you had that milliseconds ahead of them to pull the trigger. You saw them first.
Yep.
Yep. And or like voice calls, you mentioned voice calls. That's when you hear you both start talking at the same time, and then you go ahead. No, you go ahead. Okay. And then it's that hard communication because of that milliseconds of delay.
Right. So the other part of latency is variable latency. So if your network is actually better off to be 10 milliseconds all the time than it is to be like 2 milliseconds sometimes and 20 milliseconds other times. And that's what we see in other technologies such as the cable modem systems, which are traditional coax systems, which is what we operated for about 15 years before we went to fiber. We see a lot of variable latency, and so that makes voice in particular and video feel a little chunky. There'll be fits and starts. So the variable latency is also a big component, and our network is it has very, very low latency.
That's what I love about bringing you on, man. I never thought about the variable latency, and that's maybe why you see some of the catch up, right? Is that what you're talking about for the phone calls and stuff?
Yep, definitely.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So what about, go ahead.
Yeah, so just the throughput and the latency and jitter all contribute to the performance of the network.
Right. Because in fact, I'm coming up with a video soon of comparing like real world experience using, our fiber here. In my house, I have 250 versus Starlink. And I'm going to be using mostly everyday things, web browsing, general tech pages or with ads and whatever, loading some YouTube videos, very basic things. But I also want to do more of a deep dive of like, what about a video call, audio call, and different things. And now I need to figure out how I'm going to factor in maybe some variable latency. That's very interesting because it was all over the map with obviously Starlink with satellite, that you're going to have more variable latency for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, Elon Musk is talking about adding these ground stations. That's a really interesting concept, and it makes a lot of sense because let's say you've got, if you're Starlink and you have a ground station in LA and one in New York, then in the middle of the US, your latency is going to be higher because you have to go up, over, and then once you hit the ground, then it's all fiber to wherever your final destination is. So the more ground stations you can add, the lower the latency will be for the whole network.
Yep, and I think the reasoning behind some of that, and I'm still trying to learn about the technology of it, but they're saying that the speed of light, obviously through fiber, or they're saying through the vacuum of space, it's even faster than obviously through a fiber cable. So that's what they're saying, like a longer haul could be faster. But that's where I'm trying to figure out, like, well, that latency is still going to have to get way down, right? Because, it can still travel pretty fast on fiber.
Yeah, the reality is, so from our little network here in Cedar Falls, we've got fiber links to Chicago, Minneapolis, and Des Moines. Des Moines maybe 6 milliseconds, and this is again the speed of light. And Chicago's about 8 or 9 milliseconds, and Minneapolis is about 7, 8 milliseconds. So,
and for reference, Chicago's like 6 hours, or I shouldn't measure in time. 300 miles?
5-hour drive, I guess, depending on traffic. But at those locations, our network connects with the biggest networks in the world. And so, obviously Starlink is kind of replicating that, but on a much bigger scale, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier, Starlink would be great for more rural people. In fact, we have a friend, Julie, who actually is trying to get internet, and she has tried satellite, and she's even tried getting some wireless from CFU, but it just couldn't reach because of the technology through the trees and all that. Which is what you were trying to do to provide people in the rural, which is pretty sweet. But anyway, she's very excited about Starlink. And from what I've noticed from the trends, Iowa, Montana, a lot of northern states with little population, a lot of people are excited.
Yeah, we do run a wireless network in our rural area, and we built that network probably almost 9 years ago now. And we just, I wish we just went fiber to begin with. It was great because those residents didn't have any better option. But in the end, there's still line of sight issues. We can't cover 100% of those customers. Julie's a great example. Yeah, we tried to serve her, but it just didn't work. With fiber, you can do it. It's more expensive, but it's once you've dragged the fiber through people's petunias, it's in there, and it's going to be there for decades. So as we've proven, the fiber capacity is nearly limitless. We're 10 gig synchronous today, and we're already looking at the next PON technology, which will be, maybe 25 gig, 40 gig, or 100 gig. So we're not resting on our laurels, and we continue to look at new technologies.
Right. And we're definitely spoiled. You guys definitely do seem to, dot the I's and cross the T's with redundancy and all of that. And I get to talk to one of your network engineers more often, but I love just hearing about it. But in terms of reliability, could it be more reliable? I mean, they're still launching 60 satellites at a time. It seems like every few weeks. And they're right now, I don't know if you've ever seen the map, but you can see a map of all their satellites in space and moving instantly on the Earth. It's incredible.
Oh, cool.
But right now you can actually see some gaps of the circles, right?
Okay.
And people are noticing right now some of the, I lost internet for 10 seconds until another satellite went over.
Sure.
But that compared to, eventually they're going to have, I think they've been granted like 42,000 satellites eventually they can have. And I think they're around 1,200 now. I might be wrong on those numbers, but they're close.
Okay.
But that compared to eventually once they have more versus someone taking a backhoe through one of your fiber lines, could it be, just as reliable and almost a backup internet for people? What do you think of that?
I would think so. Yeah, definitely. Especially as they get more coverage. Even now, if there's if you're using it as a backup, you're not concerned about that 100% reliability or 4
Right.
or 5 nines reliability.
Yeah, very true. But it could, in some ways, save some companies, especially if they're very heavily online and they need at least some kind of backup, even if it is, slower latency. At least there's something to instant kick over to.
Yeah, and that's the trick is we work through fully redundant solutions for some of our customers. They just can't be down. The trick is to actually test it and go in and pull the plug. Okay, did it actually work?
Right.
So there's no test like actually unplugging the cable and see what happens.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't think people realize how much money and effort it takes to take it 100% active, right? It's insane amounts of money, insane amounts of testing and technology to make sure it actually works. Like it's exponentially more just to make sure you get that extra 9, right? At the end of 4 nines. But so how does this compare to 5G? We keep hearing about 5G more and more, good or bad. What do you think of all that?
Yeah, 5G has seen a lot of marketing hype. There's more hype than there should be, I think. But 5G is very interesting. It is going to come. It is, especially if you look at the history of cell service, and you may have heard of small cells. So historically, cell service was these big macro towers that served kilometers, many kilometers circumference. And what they've discovered is they can get higher throughput by adding smaller cells. And in the end, to have a full 5G network, you're going to have, like in a community our size where 40,000 residents, you're going to have thousands of access points on street lights. And it's going to take a long time to build that out. And in the end, you have to have fiber connecting each one of these. So from our viewpoint, we see 5G as a long-term competitive threat, perhaps, but it's going to be a long ways out. They are seeing speeds comparable to fiber, but it's still not going to be the latency that fiber is going to be able to achieve.
Right.
The three things they talk about with 5G are super low latency. They talk about Internet of Things, so super high number of devices. And the third thing they talk about is super high bandwidth. And due to the way physics works, you can't have all three.
No.
with the wireless
choose
network.
two.
So it's actually three different sets of technologies that they kind of lump into one 5G marketing thing. So we'll see how it pans out. It's going to happen, but it's going to take a long time. And where it's available, I think it's a pretty good service for customers. But if you have a fiber option, you're probably going to choose that.
Yep. And it's the multiple access points is similar to, like, you can't just have one, similar to wireless, right? 5G versus just wireless in your house. You can't just have one massive radio, because your little cell phone's pretty low powered, antenna can't talk back to the megaphone sometimes, right? So you've got to have multiple radios.
As you increase bandwidth, you reduce coverage. So if you want really high bandwidth, you have to have lower coverage, which means more access points or more radios throughout your home or throughout the community, depending on what technology you're talking about.
Yep. So I got a couple fun questions at the end, but first I'm going to ask you, what do you think, should ISPs be scared of Starlink right now?
Depends on the ISP. CFU isn't worried. I'm not too worried right now. But if you run a wireless, a fixed wireless network, or if you are a coax or DSL,
traditional satellite.
Yeah, traditional satellite for sure. Yeah, definitely a competitor. Part of it is, what level of customer service do you provide? Is your network reliable? There's a number of factors that go into it, but some ISPs are definitely going to lose customers.
Yeah. Right now they are calling the Starlink a good enough beta is what they're calling it, and I would say, from my experiences, it's good enough. The experience I've got from it all, and the setup, incredibly easy. You don't have to use their router. You can actually just plug right into the satellite from the PoE injector here. So I think they've tried to think through, even though it's an early beta, they've thought through a lot of stuff already.
Yeah, as complex as the technology is, they've really made it user-friendly, which is a big challenge. Almost on a daily basis at work, I think, man, this is still so complex. It's 2021. Why is this stuff still so complex?
Yeah, seriously. And sometimes it's the opposite. Something so simple like streaming, people ask me all the time, how do I do a live stream of this whole thing with multiple cameras? And I'm like, oh man, I know it's easy with your phone to pull out and live stream, but to do a multi-camera setup, it's massively hard. But everything's getting so easy today. It's pretty cool. And even with wireless and networks, I think that's sometimes the issue at homes, right? Because I often get asked about, I don't have good coverage at my house. How do I extend my network at my house? And I can't run a cable and I can't do this. And I'm like, well, man, that's a loaded question. It's not, what's your neighbor's access points like? What's your are you in a complex that has tons of different, access points all around you? There's a lot of stuff to factor there.
Yeah, so my office is across the hall from the help desk, and I get to hear all of their calls, and a lot of those calls are pretty tough, particularly with what you're talking about, coverage inside the home. Well, they say your internet isn't working. Well, the internet is working. It's just inside your home, the wireless isn't so great. And so we launched a service for managed wireless, and we want to we're taking those calls anyway. We're troubleshooting those calls anyway. So it's a service that we provide. We provide the router. We provide the mesh units if you need to extend wireless to other parts of the house. And so it's good for people who they just want stuff to work, right? And so we come in, we do a site survey. We'll optimize the location of the access points, but it's a challenge because older homes that have plaster walls with the metal mesh. I mean, basically each room is a Faraday cage, and so it's really hard to in some homes it's really a challenge to provide excellent coverage. So.
Yep, I've been in said Faraday cage home. I owned one for way too many years. We just recently moved, but yeah, it was and it wasn't a big house, but it was hard to cover. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah, absolutely. So one funny thing is Rob and I actually met my first day in IT. Actually, I shadowed this guy. I mean, he was in charge of like all super high level, bank routers and all of that. And so I had the privilege to be able to shadow Rob. In fact, he met me at my wedding. Actually, I think I met him. My wife used to babysit his kids. And a funny story was at my job interview for IT, first job, and right out of college. I had never really met Rob except for my wedding. And Rob happened to be in the office, the company he worked for, right? And my boss said, "Hey, I think Rob's here. Let me call him in to the interview so he can talk to us." And I was like, wow, he doesn't really know me. I hope this goes well, because I put Rob down as a reference because we're kind of family friends. And Rob comes in. We played it off cool. And Rob goes, "Well, he knows Rob, so he's a shoo-in." And I get the job offer on the spot, thanks to you, Rob.
Yeah, and you were a valuable asset to the company.
Yeah, it was definitely been fun working with you, and even now, watching you where you've taken, the network for our whole city, but not only our city. CFU actually is backhauling other communities now, right?
Yeah, we provide wholesale service to other municipal communications utilities. So, yeah, we talk about this. We've come to the realization how our service isn't just imperative for our community. Other communities now rely on this service, and so we strive for great customer service, not just for our customers, but for our customers as well. So, yeah, it's a fun network, and it's fun to be part of a company that is here for serving the community and doing awesome stuff.
Yep. So one more fun question before I let you get back to your day job here. What is the fastest fiber module you have at CFU right now?
Our core routers are all 100 gig.
100 gig fiber.
So 100 gig between all our core routers, and we're extending that out into the network farther and farther.
And how many ports do you have of 100 gig?
So we're looking at adding a card to our core switch, and I think it's around $100,000 for an 8-port 100 gig, and that's pretty heavily discounted.
Right. And now you talk, going back to the redundancy thing, you talk about redundancy now, and you need multiple and failover.
Yeah,
I don't know how that all looks.
It was like 2 or more. You have
right.
one and then an extra one. So
here's what I think is cool. Like, you being able to backhaul other communities and all of that, like, you're able to, because you've built this incredible network and service, you're now able to provide that redundancy for cities that would have no chance of even maybe buying a much smaller 10 gig router and maybe 2 of them, right, for that redundancy, and even have the technology to maybe know how to do that.
Yeah, they're still responsible for all their equipment, and they can drive as much redundancy as they want, and it does get exponentially expensive. And in some cases, they can get a link to their own link up to Minneapolis, let's say. But the value that we provide is we've got multiple links and multiple providers.
Yep.
And if if Des Moines goes dark, heaven forbid, we can survive that because we have enough capacity on these other redundant links that it's not going to impact us.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Rob, thanks for taking the time. You do an incredible job at your network, and appreciate you just sharing the wealth of knowledge that you've learned being a ISP provider for all these people. And just
awesome. Yeah, appreciate it. It's been fun watching your channel start to blow up, and your videos are great. Appreciate what you're doing there.
Thanks, man. Well, if you guys have any questions for me or Rob, I'll pass them on to Rob. Maybe he'll have time to answer those. Go ahead and drop those down below. Send us a like, and I'm definitely going to be owing you a cup of coffee, Rob. Thank you so much, bud.
Good talking to you. See ya.
See you guys.